The first signs emerged before dawn, buried inside what appeared to be an ordinary parliamentary briefing. A vote few expected suddenly gained momentum. Senior aides stopped answering questions. Royal correspondents began receiving unusual warnings. Then came the whispers that a decision involving the Sussex children had moved far beyond palace gossip and into the halls of government. What began as a procedural debate was rapidly becoming one of the most controversial royal controversies in years. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, almost nobody paid attention. Parliamentary discussions unfold every day. Motions are proposed, debated, amended, and often forgotten before the public ever notices. That was why the briefing initially attracted so little interest. To experienced political observers, it appeared to be just another routine item buried beneath larger national concerns. Yet according to growing reports from both political and royal circles, something about this particular proposal felt different from the beginning. The language was unusually sensitive. Questions were reportedly answered with caution, and those closest to the discussion seemed reluctant to elaborate on details. As word slowly spread, royal commentators initially dismissed the proposal as largely symbolic. Similar ideas had surfaced before and failed to gain meaningful traction. Most observers assumed this debate would follow a familiar path. There would be headlines, political disagreement, and eventually a quiet conclusion. But within days, that assumption began to crumble. Unexpectedly, the motion appeared to gain momentum. Reports suggested that individuals who had previously shown little interest in the matter were suddenly paying close attention. Discussions expanded beyond technical parliamentary procedure and into broader questions involving royal funding, public accountability, and constitutional precedent. What had started as a niche political conversation was evolving into something far more consequential. Inside royal circles, concern reportedly began to grow. According to palace sources cited by commentators, officials were carefully monitoring developments as the situation unfolded. No public statements were issued. No formal interventions occurred. Yet the unusual silence itself attracted attention. The palace, long accustomed to navigating sensitive issues, appeared unwilling to comment publicly while events remained fluid. That restraint only fueled additional speculation. Questions quickly multiplied. If future public funding arrangements were being debated, what precedent might such a decision establish? Would the discussion remain narrowly focused on finances, or could it eventually influence broader conversations about royal responsibilities and privileges? And perhaps most importantly, what implications might such a debate carry for future generations connected to the monarchy? These questions soon moved beyond Westminster. Across Britain, public interest intensified as details allegedly began leaking from multiple sources. Some reports emphasized taxpayer accountability. Others framed the issue as part of a larger conversation regarding the modern role of the royal family. Supporters and critics offered sharply different interpretations. Every new revelation generated another wave of discussion. Amid the growing controversy, reports emerged that William and Catherine had allegedly been briefed on potential implications. Whether those briefings were precautionary or substantial remained unclear, yet their reported involvement reinforced a perception that the matter was no longer being viewed as a minor political dispute. Increasingly, it appeared connected to questions about the monarchy's future structure and public expectations. Meanwhile, another detail attracted widespread attention. Observers noticed a striking lack of response from representatives associated with the Sussexes. As speculation expanded and headlines multiplied, public statements remained limited. That silence quickly became a story in its own right. Supporters argued there was no reason to engage with unconfirmed reports. Critics interpreted the absence of comment differently. Regardless of perspective, the lack of clarity only intensified public curiosity. Soon, what had begun as a largely procedural debate transformed into a national conversation touching on issues far larger than anyone initially anticipated. Questions about funding became questions about accountability. Questions about precedent became questions about identity. And questions about one proposal began intersecting with broader concerns regarding the future shape of the monarchy itself. The deeper observers looked, the more they realized this was never simply about a parliamentary motion, but what appeared to be a routine political dispute was actually connected to a much deeper struggle over royal accountability, privilege, and the future shape of the monarchy itself. By the time lawmakers gathered for the debate, the atmosphere had already shifted. What should have been a straightforward discussion suddenly carried the weight of history. Every speech, every amendment, every procedural move seemed to point toward a conclusion that many believed impossible only weeks earlier. The transformation was remarkable. What had begun as a proposal that few political observers considered likely to advance was now commanding attention across Westminster. Lawmakers who rarely commented on royal matters reportedly found themselves drawn into the debate. Journalists who initially viewed the motion as a minor procedural issue suddenly began dedicating extensive coverage to its progress. The conversation had evolved beyond technical details. It had become a symbolic test of how the relationship between public accountability and royal privilege might be interpreted in a rapidly changing era. As parliamentary discussions intensified, support for the proposal appeared to emerge from unexpected directions. According to reports, advocates framed the issue primarily around accountability. They argued that questions involving future public obligations deserved scrutiny, regardless of the individuals involved. From their perspective, the debate was not personal, it was institutional. They insisted that modern governance required transparency and consistency whenever taxpayer interests intersected with royal arrangements. Yet opponents viewed the situation through a very different lens. Critics warned that the proposal risked opening complicated constitutional questions, with consequences extending far beyond its original intent. Some expressed concern about creating precedents that future governments might interpret in unpredictable ways. Others argued that matters connected to royal family members should be approached with exceptional caution, particularly when decisions could influence perceptions of fairness, tradition, and constitutional stability. The result was an increasingly heated discussion. Historical precedents soon became central to the debate. Lawmakers reportedly revisited previous arrangements involving members of the royal family, comparing past practices with contemporary expectations. Long-forgotten examples resurfaced. Old decisions were re-examined. Historical context suddenly became one of the most powerful tools available to both supporters and opponents. The deeper the discussions went, the more complex the issue appeared. What initially seemed straightforward revealed layers of constitutional sensitivity, public expectation, and political risk. Every argument generated a counterargument. Every proposed solution created new questions. Observers who expected a routine parliamentary exchange instead found themselves witnessing a debate that touched upon some of the most fundamental questions surrounding the monarchy's role in modern society. Meanwhile, reports suggested intense activity was occurring behind the scenes. According to various political sources and commentators, lobbying efforts allegedly increased as the proposal gained momentum. Supporters attempted to strengthen backing for their position. Opponents worked to highlight potential complications. Private conversations reportedly became as important as public speeches. While much of this activity remained hidden from public view, Many observers believed crucial negotiations were unfolding away from cameras and parliamentary chambers. As the proposal attracted greater attention, the story expanded beyond Britain's borders. International media outlets began covering developments with growing interest. Commentators abroad debated the implications. Foreign audiences, already fascinated by royal affairs, followed every update closely. What started as a domestic parliamentary matter had evolved into an international headline, drawing scrutiny from observers who viewed the British monarchy as one of the world's most recognizable institutions. That global attention only increased the pressure. Every development was analyzed in real time. Every parliamentary maneuver generated fresh speculation. Supporters believed momentum was building toward a historic outcome. Critics warned of unintended consequences. Neither side appeared willing to retreat. Yet as significant as the parliamentary debate had become, many observers gradually realized that legislation and procedure represented only part of the story. Beneath the arguments over accountability, precedent, and governance stood real individuals whose lives could be affected by whatever decision emerged from Westminster. And as the debate moved closer to its decisive moment, public attention slowly began shifting away from lawmakers and toward the people at the center of the controversy. Yet the vote itself was only part of the story, because attention soon turned toward the family members who stood to be affected most. As news spread beyond Westminster, the reaction was immediate. Commentators, supporters, critics, and royal watchers all rushed to interpret what the proposal could mean. But amid the noise, one question dominated every discussion. How would the Sussex household respond? What had started as a parliamentary debate was now evolving into a global story. Newspapers across multiple countries carried headlines examining every development. Television panels dedicated entire segments to analyzing potential consequences. Political experts debated constitutional implications, while royal commentators focused on the family dynamics unfolding behind the scenes. The controversy had expanded far beyond Westminster, and with every passing hour, public fascination seemed to grow stronger. For many observers, the central issue was no longer the proposal itself. Instead, attention increasingly shifted toward the Sussex family and what the debate might mean for their future. Analysts offered competing interpretations. Some argued that the proposal represented a broader effort to redefine expectations surrounding royal privilege in the modern era. Others suggested that it reflected growing political pressure for greater accountability whenever public resources became part of the conversation. The uncertainty created a perfect environment for speculation. Questions about future financial arrangements quickly became one of the most discussed aspects of the controversy. Commentators examined possible outcomes, explored hypothetical scenarios, and debated what any future changes might mean in practical terms. Yet despite the endless analysis, very few concrete answers emerged. The deeper the discussion went, the more complicated the situation appeared. Supporters of the Sussex family reacted strongly. Many argued that the proposal unfairly targeted individuals who had already established lives outside traditional royal structures. They questioned the motivations behind the debate and expressed concern that public perception was being shaped by incomplete information. To them, the controversy seemed less about accountability and more about continuing divisions that had already generated years of headlines and public disagreement. Critics viewed the situation through a different lens. They argued that whenever public funding enters a conversation, public scrutiny inevitably follows. From their perspective, accountability and transparency were not personal attacks, but fundamental principles. They maintained that questions surrounding funding arrangements deserved open discussion regardless of who might be affected. As a result, the debate quickly became polarized, with both sides convinced they were defending fairness. Meanwhile, reports suggested advisors connected to various interested parties were working intensely to assess potential implications. Behind the scenes, teams of experts reportedly examined possible outcomes, evaluated risks, and considered how future developments might unfold. Although much of that activity remained hidden from public view, observers increasingly believed significant conversations were taking place away from the spotlight. As official information remained limited, social media filled the vacuum. Platforms erupted with fierce disagreement. Supporters, critics, commentators, and casual observers all weighed in. Every rumor generated fresh debate. Every article inspired new theories. Claims and counterclaims spread rapidly across the digital landscape, creating an environment where emotion often moved faster than facts. The controversy became one of the most discussed royal topics in recent memory, drawing attention from audiences who rarely followed parliamentary affairs. The intensity of the reaction surprised even seasoned royal observers. What had begun as a discussion about procedure now seemed connected to larger themes involving fairness, responsibility, privilege, and the future relationship between the monarchy and the public. Each new headline added another layer to an already complex story. Yet amid the endless commentary, one reality remained clear. Nobody outside a small group of decision-makers fully understood where events were ultimately leading. And while public attention remained focused on television debates, newspaper headlines, and social media arguments, many suspected the most important discussions were happening elsewhere. Away from microphones. Away from public statements. Away from the intense scrutiny that now surrounded every aspect of the controversy. While public arguments intensified, private conversations were reportedly unfolding inside royal residences far from television cameras. Inside royal circles, the issue was said to be viewed through an entirely different lens. This was no longer merely a financial matter. It was becoming a question of precedent, responsibility, and the future boundaries of royal privilege. While public debate remained focused on funding, politics, and headlines, reports suggested that conversations inside royal residences were moving in a very different direction. According to palace insiders and royal commentators, senior figures within the monarchy were less concerned with the immediate controversy and more focused on what it might mean years from now. The issue was no longer being evaluated solely through the prism of current events. Increasingly, it was being viewed as a test case that could influence future expectations for generations to come. That shift in perspective changed everything. For many within royal circles, the central question was not whether one proposal would succeed or fail. The deeper concern reportedly involved precedent. Once a new standard is established, it often becomes part of a much larger framework. Decisions that appear limited in scope can eventually shape future debates, future policies, and future expectations. That possibility, according to reports, became a major topic of discussion behind closed doors. Prince William was reportedly among those paying close attention to the long-term implications. Observers have long noted his interest in institutional continuity and modernization. According to sources familiar with royal thinking, William allegedly viewed the controversy through the lens of future leadership. The monarchy's relationship with the public has always depended upon trust, and trust is built upon consistency. If public expectations were changing, then future monarchs would need to understand and adapt to those expectations while preserving the institution's stability. At the same time, reports suggested that Catherine encouraged a more cautious approach. According to royal insiders, the Princess of Wales reportedly emphasized the importance of stability during a period already filled with uncertainty. Rather than reacting impulsively to headlines or political pressure, she was said to favor careful deliberation and measured responses. For Catherine, According to these accounts, maintaining public confidence remained just as important as addressing the immediate controversy itself. As discussions continued, advisors reportedly began revisiting historical funding frameworks that had shaped relationships between the monarchy and public institutions for decades. Previous arrangements were examined. Historical precedents were reviewed. Comparisons were drawn to earlier moments when royal finances and public expectations had intersected in ways that required delicate handling. The deeper those reviews progressed, the broader the conversation became. Concerns reportedly emerged regarding future expectations inside the monarchy. If public attitudes toward accountability continued evolving, what standards might future generations be expected to meet? How could the institution preserve tradition while responding to demands for greater transparency? And perhaps most importantly, how could those objectives be balanced without undermining the continuity that has long defined the crown? According to reports, these questions soon became inseparable from discussions about public trust. Trust has always been one of the monarchy's most valuable assets. It cannot be legislated. It cannot be inherited. It must be maintained. That reality reportedly shaped many of the private conversations taking place within royal residences. Advisors understood that every controversy, regardless of its outcome, influences public perception. And public perception ultimately influences the institution's long-term stability. As a result, the issue increasingly became linked to future succession planning. Not because it directly affected the line of succession, but because it touched upon the environment in which future monarchs would operate. William's eventual reign, according to many observers, would likely unfold in a world with very different expectations than those faced by previous generations. The current debate appeared to offer a glimpse into those changing realities. And while royal advisors continued weighing the implications behind closed doors, events outside palace walls were moving quickly. Political support for the proposal continued growing. Public discussion intensified. Media coverage expanded. What had once seemed like a theoretical possibility was beginning to acquire real momentum. But even as private deliberations continued, the political momentum behind the proposal was becoming impossible to ignore. Then came the moment many had doubted would ever arrive. After weeks of speculation, procedural maneuvering, and intense debate, lawmakers cast their votes. Within minutes, the outcome sent shockwaves through both political and royal circles. For days, anticipation had been building. Commentators predicted every possible scenario. Supporters and opponents alike claimed momentum was on their side. Yet despite the endless forecasts, uncertainty remained until the very end. That uncertainty vanished the moment the votes were counted. Whatever expectations existed beforehand, the result immediately transformed a theoretical debate into a tangible political reality. The reaction was swift and dramatic. Supporters of the proposal celebrated what they viewed as a significant step toward modernization and accountability. To them, the decision represented evidence that long-standing assumptions about public funding and royal privilege could be openly examined in a modern democratic system. They argued that transparency and responsibility were essential for maintaining public confidence, and that difficult conversations should never be avoided simply because they involve members of the royal family. Critics reacted with equal intensity. Many warned that the consequences could extend far beyond the immediate issue under discussion. They questioned whether lawmakers fully understood the precedents they might be establishing. Others argued that decisions involving royal matters often carry implications that unfold over years rather than weeks. What appeared straightforward today, they cautioned, could generate unforeseen complications tomorrow. As reactions poured in, constitutional experts immediately began examining the implications. Legal analysts, historians, and political commentators debated what the outcome might mean in practice. Some described the decision as historic, Others urged caution, emphasizing that implementation often proves more complicated than legislation itself. Questions emerged regarding enforcement, interpretation, and the broader constitutional framework surrounding royal affairs. The debate, far from ending with the vote, appeared to be entering a new phase altogether. Public opinion quickly revealed deep divisions. Across the country, supporters viewed the outcome as a victory for reform. Opponents saw it as an unnecessary escalation of tensions that had already placed significant strain on public discussions surrounding the monarchy. The sharp contrast in reactions highlighted a deeper reality. This was never simply about funding. It was about competing visions of what the monarchy should represent in the 21st century. The institution suddenly found itself facing renewed scrutiny from every direction. Yet the most significant consequences were not political, they were symbolic, touching fundamental questions about what royal status means in the modern age. As the dust settled, competing narratives emerged. One side portrayed the decision as necessary reform. The other saw it as a dramatic escalation in an already painful family divide. Both claimed to be defending fairness. Both insisted history would vindicate them. Advocates of reform argued that modernization is essential for any institution hoping to remain relevant. They viewed the outcome as part of a broader evolution already taking place across society. From their perspective, accountability strengthens institutions rather than weakens them. They believed the monarchy could adapt to changing expectations while preserving its traditions and public role. Opponents remained unconvinced. They warned that actions taken in the name of reform can sometimes produce unintended consequences. Questions about future generations quickly entered the conversation. If expectations surrounding royal responsibilities continue evolving, what standards will future family members be expected to meet? How will new precedents influence decisions decades from now? And where should the balance between tradition and modernization ultimately be drawn? Media narratives became increasingly polarized. Every development was interpreted through competing frameworks. Some outlets focused on accountability. Others emphasized family dynamics and institutional stability. As a result, public trust itself became one of the most discussed themes of the entire controversy. The debate had evolved beyond policy and procedure. It had become a conversation about identity, legitimacy, and the future direction of the monarchy. Royal observers increasingly predicted lasting repercussions, not necessarily because of the immediate outcome, but because of the questions the controversy had forced people to confront. And perhaps that was the most important consequence of all. The episode exposed uncertainties that had long existed beneath the surface. It revealed competing expectations about what the monarchy should be, how it should operate, and what responsibilities accompany royal status in a changing world. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of the entire episode was what it exposed about the monarchy's uncertain future. Long after the headlines began to fade, the larger implications remained. The controversy was no longer simply about money. It had evolved into a broader conversation about legacy, inheritance, public service, and what role future generations of royals might ultimately play. As the immediate drama began to settle, analysts and royal observers found themselves focusing on a much bigger question. What would this episode mean years from now? Political battles come and go. Parliamentary votes are eventually replaced by new debates. Headlines disappear. Yet certain controversies leave a lasting imprint because they reveal deeper tensions that were already present beneath the surface. Increasingly, many believed this was one of those moments. The discussion gradually shifted away from short-term outcomes and toward long-term consequences. Attention turned to the future generations of the royal family and the environment they would inherit. If public expectations were changing, how would future royals adapt? If accountability was becoming a more prominent demand from the public, how would the institution balance that expectation with traditions that have existed for centuries? These questions proved far more significant than any single political decision. Comparisons with previous royal transitions quickly emerged. Historians pointed out that every generation of the monarchy faces its own defining challenge. Some generations confront war. Others face constitutional crises, public scandals, or dramatic social change. What makes those periods significant is not simply the events themselves, but how the institution responds. In many ways, observers argued, the current controversy represented another chapter in that long historical pattern. Constitutional experts also began discussing the broader evolution of royal norms. Expectations that once seemed fixed are increasingly being re-examined through a modern lens. Public attitudes continue to evolve. Political realities shift. The monarchy, while rooted in tradition, exists within a society that is constantly changing. That reality creates pressures that future leaders of the institution will inevitably have to navigate. At the center of many of these discussions stood the Sussex legacy. Supporters viewed the debate as evidence of how deeply public conversations about fairness and accountability have changed. Critics argued that years of controversy had contributed to the current situation. Whatever perspective people held, few disagreed that the Sussex story had become one of the defining royal narratives of the modern era. Its influence extended far beyond any single decision and continued shaping discussions about the future of the monarchy. Throughout all of this, institutional stability remained a primary concern. Royal advisors, commentators, and constitutional observers repeatedly returned to the same principle. The monarchy survives because it adapts without losing its identity. Every challenge tests that balance. Every controversy forces difficult questions. Yet continuity remains the ultimate objective. And as the arguments continued, one final reality became impossible to escape. In the end, the controversy revealed something larger than any single vote, family disagreement, or political battle. It exposed the tension between tradition and change, a tension that has defined the monarchy for generations and will likely continue shaping it for decades to come. The political landscape surrounding the monarchy is changing. Public accountability now occupies a more central place in national conversations than ever before. Expectations that might once have been accepted without question are increasingly being scrutinized. As a result, royal privilege and public expectation continue to collide in ways that future leaders of the institution cannot ignore. For William, Catherine, and the generation that will eventually inherit responsibility for the crown, the challenges ahead may prove even more complex than those faced by their predecessors. They will be expected to preserve tradition while embracing change. They will need to maintain public trust while navigating intense public scrutiny. They will inherit an institution whose history is its greatest strength, but whose future depends on adaptation. The Sussex debate has left a lasting mark on that conversation. Parliament's role in shaping discussions surrounding the monarchy has also become more visible, demonstrating how political institutions continue influencing royal affairs in the modern age. Together, these developments suggest that a new chapter in royal history may already be underway. And perhaps that is the true significance of this entire episode. Not the vote itself, not the controversy itself, but what it revealed about the forces shaping the future of the monarchy and the expectations that future generations will inherit. Because while individual battles may end, the struggle to define the future of the crown and the responsibilities that come with it never truly does. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.